A big thank you to PlayStation for sponsoring this content.
Hi, I'm Opalink Cosplay, and these guys asked me to make this guy, so I'm going to show you how I did that. Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Building Boy. In this series I'm going to be taking you through how I made my Atreus cosplay from God of War Ragnarök. And I'm very excited because this is the first proper episode where we look at my actual build process. And as you can probably tell by the title, we're going to be looking at fabric, which includes fabric choices, where I went shopping, and then also going into detail about how I started the first parts of the costume, which included the tunic, the trousers, and the red Spartan sash that Atreus wears. So let's go back to Abby a few months ago, who had very different hair that I miss dearly.
Hello, I am in Gold Hawk Road as promised, and I'm here with the loveliest Chase! If you already know Chase, through my channel especially, you probably know him as the loveliest Electro Spectrum who did our Ashes video. I'm very excited to get shopping, find those perfect materials for Boy, and I'll keep you updated as we go, so bye.
I'm thinking about this suede possibly for his main leather waistcoat because I want it to be a bit more breathable than leather. It's very nice. I found this, which is quite a possible material for the base tunic. It's very nice. Also, Lord of the Rings. Look at these tiny buttons. So I thought I'd show you guys some of the material I got. So we've got right here, this is some of the gorgeous fur I got from Gold Hawk Road. I'm not sure if I'm actually going to use this one or my original fur I used when I made original Atreus. But we're going to see. I just really liked the texture of this, and it looked more like a wolf pelt, which is what I'm assuming Atreus' tunic's meant to be. And then moving on, we've got this absolutely beautiful textured fabric that's going to be his main tunic. It's pretty thick, and obviously it's not stretch, so it's going to be a nice cozy fit. But the colour is beautiful, and the texture I'm just in love with. And speaking of texture, here's the final bit I bought at Gold Hawk Road, which is the leather for his tunic, like the really nice pale tan leather. This was perfect. Like when I saw the colour, I was just ecstatic because I was like, that's perfect, can I have that please? And I managed to get it for a pretty decent price as well, because it's like a whole half hide. So yeah. And then speaking of leather, we've got some other leathers here that I'm going to be using on Atreus. There's going to be more as well, but this is just a little look. So we've got this really nice one here, which is really soft. This one's a bit thicker. I think I might use this for his front little panels he's got. And then this dark one. I've got, like I said, I've got a range of leather that I was very kindly gifted that I'm really excited to take a look at and put together. So now, before we go anywhere, I'm going to do a bit of a disclaimer throughout this series. I don't really document my patterning process because I'm not very good at it. The way I pattern is I literally measure myself and then work straight onto the fabric and sort of make it too big and then cut it to size. I just can't use pre-made patterns. I'm awful with using them, so I literally just completely wing it. I made the under blue tunic using basically 3 different panels, so I had the 2 front panels and then a solid back panel, as well as the 2 sleeves. I knew that I didn't have to be super tight with this one because it wouldn't really be seen under the costume, but as you can see a bit later, I decided that I would put extra work in anyway, just to spite myself and make things harder for myself. Once all the patterns were cut, the material is quite thick, so I did a little test piece just to make sure that my thread would hold properly and that my tension was correct, and it was all fine, so I could move on to actually stitching all the base pattern pieces together.
Lots of pinning, lots of sewing, but I do love this part, it's very satisfying. On the tunic, it's almost like 2 layers of fabric on top of each other. I knew I didn't need to do that because I could just fake this effect, so in order to do that, I just folded the material down. I specifically made it a little bit longer than it needed to be, and then folded the material over itself, and then I would sew a line to make it look like it was 2 layers of fabric. Once everything was folded and pinned, I took it back to my sewing machine and sewed that line in. Now, this is where I'm a fool. As I mentioned before, I knew that a lot of the costume wouldn't be visible underneath all the other layers, but I decided I'm going to put effort into making it a nice lace up front. I did this mostly because I wanted to make sure it was a really tight, nice fit, and if I used something like poppers or Velcro, I didn't want to risk it being bulky and like misshapen beneath the leather tunic. So I sewed on some leather strips basically to make an edging on the top half of the tunic, as you can see here. I then marked out where I wanted the eyelet holes to go, and these are my beloved eyelets. I use these quite a bit throughout the costume. To add the eyelets to the costume, I basically used this hole punching tool here with my hammer. I probably don't use it correctly, but it works for me. So I punch in some holes where I want the eyelets to go, and then I use the pre-made eyelet tool to once again hammer them into place with the top and the bottom half, so it like sandwiches the material between and sits really nice and flush. I absolutely love this method. I love adding eyelets to costume. It just looks like a really nice finish. And I was kind of going between using gold or silver details, but because he has the gold band on his arm, I was like, I'm gonna go with gold and keep it all consistent, even though, once again, you don't see this detail at all. The tunic has short sleeves that looks like they've almost been like ripped off. They're really frayed, really rough looking, which, you know, would make sense considering they've been living in the woods, on the run basically, hiding away from people. So nothing's going to have a really nice clean finish, I would say, and that's a really important part of this costume. Everything has weathering, everything looks like it's lived in. So I used some of those like, I don't know what you call them, the scissors with like the spiky edges to make a bit of a pre-made rough cut, and then I went in with my knife to roughen up the edges, and I literally just completely destroy it. I drag my knife through and really make it rough looking. I then also pick apart the material with my fingers and yeah, just really tear it apart. Atreus has this really weird, I say weird, there's probably meaning behind it. I think he's just stitched it up. Atreus has this stitching detail on the back of his right arm, which almost looks like lightning. So I didn't know whether it was meant to be like a reference to Thor and the whole lightning thing and whatever. That was just the way that my brain went. But yeah, he has this like embroidery detail that I then marked onto the tunic with chalk. And this is where the first of my very long process throughout the whole costume of stitching detail comes in. I went in with a lighter blue embroidery thread and just started sort of like roughly putting in where the shape would be, before then going up and building it up and making it all one continuous solid stitching line. This bit was really satisfying because it was quite a messy shape, so I could kind of do it really fluidly, and it's a really cool little detail, and I think it looks really cool on the final result of the costume. Going back to the love of my life, I went back in with some more stitching detail. He has 2 lines of like stitching beneath some leather like cord detailing. So I went in, marked out where I was going to be doing that stitching, and then used a pale thread to add those 2 lines that sit at the bottom of the tunic. As you can see, this took a while, but I was very speedy at stitching by the end of this project. Man, if you wanted something speedily done, I could very much do it. As mentioned, on top of that, there is some leather like cord detailing of little crosses. The tunic fabric is really thick, so I couldn't use, and because the cord was thick itself, it's not like I could use like a sewing needle and put through. So every single little cross you see, I had to hand punch a hole to put the thread through. So it was great, it took quite a bit of time, I will admit. Here you can see how the tunic actually closes and sits. Despite being time consuming, I'm really happy I went in and did this detail. It just means that the tunic sits really nice and flat against me beneath all the rest of the pretty bulky costume. And I just think it's a really nice little detail that I know that's there, but you could very much easily use a zip or Velcro or poppers if you're less of an insane person than me. To finish up the tunic, I then went in with my airbrush just to add weathering and to sort of accentuate where edges were and just to make it look dirty and lived in, because our boy, you know he'd be stinky.
Hi, so originally I was going to be sewing the trousers like I said on the video, but I have run out of time. So I have these like old trousers that I think my mum gave me, which if I cut off the bottom and then add elastic, they're going to be pretty perfect Atreus pants really, just for the texture. Obviously the colour is wrong because he's got darker trousers, so I have just been out and bought some dye. I'm going to put this into some water and dye it as you should, so I'm going to do that now.
Oh yeah, thanks Past Abby. So we're going on to the trousers next. Like I said, originally I was going to be making them, but at this point I was at a really tight time crunch in this process, and I just knew I couldn't make them to a standard that would hold up. And I already had some trousers that I was like, I can definitely make use of these. And that's just the cosplay way, you know, you sometimes know you have something stored away that you can utilise. So I had those pale trousers, as you can see, that I then used some Dylon, like cotton dye, which you need to use with a bunch of salt in a bucket and hot water and 40 minutes of your life, where literally slapped in the trousers with the dye and the salt and the warm water, and you just like mix it basically continuously for 45 minutes. For the first 15 minutes you have to like really just keep it going, and then 45 minutes you just keep coming back and making sure like you're moving it through so there's getting an even dye over it. Once that process is done, I wash it off using like cold water. You are meant to like shove it in a washing machine as well, but I didn't do that. And then I just leave them to air dry, so you can see a bit of the colour here. Obviously they're darker than the final result because they're still wet. You can see the final colour here, it's a bit more of a lighter brown than I would have liked, which is why I then went in with an airbrush and then also spray paint to darken them up and add a bit of colour variation and just, once again, make them look dirty. I really like making costumes look dirty. I wanted them to have that like baggy pants look at the top of the boots, and these were like full-length trousers, so what I did, I actually cut a section off the bottom of the trousers and then just sewed in some elastic, like hand stitched some elastic into the bottom just so they would like pull nicely. The trousers all done, the next major piece of fabric work was the red Spartan sash that Atreus wears. This is one of my favourite details between the first game and the second game's costume, because it's a Spartan sash that Kratos would have worn and obviously just kind of handed down to Atreus to be another layer to the costume, and it's just really cool and a really nice bit of world building that I love. And I don't know how many other people are sort of aware of it, because it's just something, you know, as someone that's extensively stared at these costumes, I see all these little details. So I used some cheap red cotton, and much like the ends of the sleeves, I went in with my knife and just scratched away, really roughened up the edges, made it look torn. I also went in with a lighter a bit later, I think, and burnt it just to make it just look really like it's been through a lot. This is a really like simple little piece of kit, and it just sits beneath all the other layers, so I didn't have to be really clean with how it attaches, so I just sewed on a little bit of Velcro so I could just easily slap it on. For the gold Spartan design, when I first made my Atreus, I went between two ways of doing it. I was going to make a template and then spray paint it, or I was going to sew it using ribbon, and I ended up using ribbon just because I really liked the sheer look of the ribbon and I think it looked really good for the costume. However, looking at the references close up on this costume, it's definitely been like painted or printed on, it's not a separate piece of material on top. So knowing that, I taped out the pattern just using like masking tape, and then went in with gold acrylic and a sponge and just literally sponged on about 2 layers of gold acrylic paint. But I made sure to make it quite patchy in places just to match the reference. I left that to dry overnight, and once that was dry I could savour the peelies. I peeled the tape off, and this method is great because it just allows for really crisp, clean design, and it's just very simple, much easier than making like a template, and considering obviously the design is really squared off, this tape worked perfectly, and I think it gave a really, really good final effect. I also then added some airbrushing detail at the end again just to make it look a bit more weathered.
And with that, all of the main material parts for Atreus are done. You can see them in action on the final costume here, and I'm really proud of the result.
I'm really glad I took time in choosing my materials because I'm really happy with how they look on the final product, especially with that weathering. The final touch for my trousers was adding a little bit of hand stitching using embroidery thread, and this just brings them more to life. It also proves you don't need to quite make everything from scratch in order for it to look good. Sometimes an adjustment is all you need. The Greek sash is just one of many layers on the costume, but it's such a poignant piece and I'm really happy with how it looks. The pop of red against the blue just really brings this costume to life. In episode 2 we're going to be taking a look at how I made the main leather tunic. This was definitely the most challenging piece of the costume, so I'm really excited to share with you guys how I tackled that. So I'll see you next Friday for episode 2 of Building Boy.